This interview was originally recorded on September 12th, 2023. Welcome to Everyone Eats. I'm Jeremy Bowditch. Today we're talking about Angelenos living on the street, unsheltered, unhoused. In 1992, there were 77,141 unhoused people in Los Angeles County. A 2024 count found 75,312. It's a stubborn problem, and given the choice between the carrot and the stick, our elected leaders have chosen the stick approach to solve it. Arrest, incarcerate, and punish.
California Governor Gavin Newsom Thursday underneath an overpass in Mission Hills, dragging trash and tossing bike pieces, helping Caltrans workers clear out a homeless camp.
A lot of this stuff we do, you don't see the results. It's nice to see the before and after. You feel like at least you accomplished something in the damn day.
2 weeks ago, Newsom issued an executive order directing state agencies to remove encampments, urging local leaders to do the same. Would you like to see other city officials doing this in LA?
Look, every single day until we turn this thing around. Where's the urgency?
In 1963, Los Angeles Municipal Code 4118 was enacted as a way to police public sidewalks. It makes it illegal to sit, sleep, or lie in public space in the city of Los Angeles. This is the basis for sweeps. That's the sanitation department trashing unhoused people's possessions, while LAPD writes tickets or makes arrests for the crime of living on the street. For decades, it's been a cat-and-mouse game between city governments and the Ninth Circuit Court over whether these laws are even constitutional. The court strikes them down, cities pivot with tweaks to continue punishing the unhoused, and the cycle continues. In 2006, the Ninth Circuit Court struck down 4118, saying it violates the Eighth Amendment against cruel and unusual punishment. If there aren't enough shelter beds, it's unconstitutional to lock someone up for being outside. Or put another way, if you have enough beds, you can lock up anyone sleeping outside. That's been the law and policy of our city for decades. If you can't afford rent and your presence outside offends someone who can, you can expect a visit from LAPD, if not a full-on sweep of all your possessions. But that wasn't enough. In September 2021, to avoid the Ninth Circuit rulings, Los Angeles City Council sharpened 4118 with amendments targeting special enforcement zones. They amended it again in September 2022 to require signs posted in these zones and to criminalize resistance or obstruction of sweeps. So, how's it working? Reports released by the city in the summer of 2024 say 2 people were housed. 2 souls. And how much did this enforcement cost? The city spent $3 million of our money to remove and prevent street encampments. The report also found 75% of the citations issued under 4118 were concentrated in just 3 LAPD divisions: the West San Fernando Valley, the West Side near National Boulevard, and Rampart, my home of 17 years, Echo Park, Silver Lake, down to MacArthur Park. Other parts of the city had 0 citations. In 2023, the Ninth Circuit Court once again decided laws like 4118 were unconstitutional. Quoting the court, "If there are no other public areas or appropriate shelters where those individuals can sleep," end quote, then cut that shit out. In the summer of 2024, a Supreme Court case overturned the Ninth Circuit decision, making it legal to punish unhoused folks for having nowhere else to go. That's where we are today, but it doesn't have to be that way. Today we're talking about what we can do to bring every Angeleno inside, and why our current strategy of handcuffs instead of house keys will never work. This show invites you to imagine a new Los Angeles and challenge the way things are. We believe a person's right to their basic needs is greater than anyone's right to make a profit. Free healthcare, free education, public housing, fair wages, a world without police or prisons. It's all possible if we fight for it together. Each episode, we open a bottle of wine and take a look at a basic need for all Angelenos. Who has it? Who goes without? Why? And what can we do about it? I talk to activists, educators, advocates, and people just trying to make ends meet. Join me, Jeremy Bowditch, as we imagine a Los Angeles where everyone eats. My guest today is Theo Henderson, a formerly unhoused advocate, activist, and host of the podcast, We the Unhoused. Everyone Eats is inspired by Etna Street Solidarity, a Los Angeles San Fernando Valley community on Etna Street organizing against the criminalization of the poor. We share food and clothes. Find out more on Instagram at Etna Street Solidarity. Welcome back to Everyone Eats. Joining me in studio is the advocate for the Unhoused, podcast extraordinaire, activist, visionary, and honestly, the Lorax for people who are getting a shit deal from our system that says if you can't pay rent, you deserve to die. Our guest today stands in direct opposition to that. Please join me in welcoming Theo Henderson from a podcast of his own creation called We the Unhoused. Joining me in studio now. Theo, thank you so much for sitting down with me.
Thank you guys for having me, and I look forward to having a productive and exciting conversation.
Awesome. So on Everyone Eats, what we're suggesting here is that there's enough to go around. The idea that in the richest country on the planet, the richest state, we have enough. Why can't we split it up in a way where everyone gets to enjoy? And so what I like to do with each guest is open a bottle of wine, because there's this idea of like champagne socialism, or if everyone shares what they have, that means we'll be living in burlap sacks and poverty and blah, blah, blah. And on this show, we want to push back against that and say that everything that we have, we created as a community, we can still have access to that. And so wine, yes, it's a luxury item, but only because that's the way we're currently doing things. In a more fair world, the people that grow the grapes would get to taste the products of those fruits, right? And so that's what we're doing here. Not only the fat cats are enjoying fine wines, but us working people, us residents, us non-owners can enjoy it too. Today we've got a 2013 Pinot Noir from California, from Sonoma County, in a vineyard called Tina Marie. And so we're going to open this now. Theo, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Like I say, nothing like having some libation to further stimulate the conversation. So, hey, let's get in.
Have you ever come across that if you are an advocate for the unhoused or someone who wants to do community work, that like you have to take a vow of poverty, right?
It is interesting that you pointed that out, because when you were mentioning about the wine, my mind went back to the time when one of my friends and their mother was talking about unhoused people eating steaks and lobsters from their EBT and SNAP. And these are working class people themselves. It lends itself a pecking order, and it believes that unhoused people are not supposed to be enjoying anything or getting any kind of frill in life. They're supposed to be at every stage miserable, demonized, which is why our whole system is created to make it seem like it's a personal defect or a failing that unhoused people are out on the streets. Or if you hear the common response that if they stop taking their money and get a job, then they wouldn't be on the street. So yes, I am definitely fully aware of people who don't believe that unhoused people are human beings, that they deserve to have joy. They don't deserve to have some luxury in life sometime, because life is hard whether you're housed or unhoused, but it's incredibly harder when you're unhoused because of the fact that our society has this penchant to constantly demonize and put unhoused people in a prison, whether it's physical or figuratively.
Everything that you're saying about who deserves what, nah, we're not doing that. So cheers.
Salute.
Even though we're not captains of industry, we're going to sip on some fine wine.
Nice.
Wow. Yeah, that is nice. I was hoping you could share with us and the listeners who may not already know a little bit about your background, who you are, where you come from, and what inspired you to start your podcast.
I have dealt with houselessness for the majority of my adult life. But when I was unhoused, I was able to, when I was a younger man, able to get out of it a little bit easier because I was able to work, or I was in a different area where I was able to tap into some resources. Where LA became a little different is because I had a medical emergency that it was extensive enough that I could not get on my feet quick enough. I had to recover. I'm not married. I don't have a wife and kids. And I didn't have a stronger family support system to be able to help me, usher me into getting recuperating, and in order for me to get on my feet. So I had to recuperate, stay in a building, and try to get on my feet too, because I lost my job, because I got sick, and tried to do all of that at the same time, and which was an impossibility. So as I started to descend into houselessness, it didn't happen overnight. I stayed couch commitment with friends, and then I felt I was overstaying, welcome.
And a couch commitment, it's basically just couch surfing, essentially.
Right. It's a touchy situation when friends want to help you, but it's difficult when they are also housed insecure or their money is funny and their change is strange. So they cannot afford this large rest like you wish that they could. So I found into that. Then I would go into quick hotels. Then I went into the seedy hotels. Then I would jump around to shelters and eventually on the street because of the unsafety issues or the carceral solutions or the curfews or the constant demeaning behavior that you have to endure when you're being unhoused and always having to bite your tongue when you have abrasive staff members or who are on a banana peel on themselves and unhoused themselves. So all of this shaped how I was functioning, being out here on the street, as well as starting to rub shoulders with other unhoused people. I became a part of the community and another part of LA, downtown LA. And they started targeting me, having the police come and try to run me out. And they tried every way to do this. And it inspired me because I was talking to my friends who unfortunately were falling prey to the respectability politics and the meritocracy. I actually had one of my friends that was arguing with me, telling me that unhoused people like to be out here. And it was frustrating. It was like, there's got to be a way to converse with people that understands that houselessness is not some kind of luxurious kind of idea. And so once I was approached to make a podcast, and I am not from the younger generation, so I'm a little bit older, and I never heard of a podcast until they started telling me, and then I listened, I was like, oh, I think I could do this. So I created my podcast, Living on the Street. I started with my friends, I started talking about my story, and what I found, to my surprise, that people were listening. But what also surprised me most, which was a surprise in a delightful way, is that unhoused people were listening. One of the first people that reached out to me was an unhoused person from New York. He's like, I cannot believe that you are unhoused, and it's so great that you are finally telling. I'm so glad that somebody is finally saying what the reality is. I'm so sick and tired of other people or housed people saying what houselessness is, and they don't have any freaking clue. And then I had another person, an unhoused person from the UK, tell me how they were coping with being unhoused. And then wishing that I had a podcast from there. Then I had someone from Cuba. Then I had Portugal. I mean, it really opened my eyes that this was such a need for unhoused people to be validated, to be heard, and finally their stories could be spoken from someone that knows what houselessness is. I know what it's like to live on the street and eat out of a garbage can. I know what it's like to sleep in a garbage can when it rains. I know what it's like to live in several facets of housing, squat in a building, hide your clothing and get it stolen, or have to deal with police harassment, or try to plan your day just to shower in order to come back because you have an appointment and you don't want the smell. Or to try to plot your day that you have to do laundry and then keep some of your laundry because you can't carry all of this stuff in a heat wave. Or to deal with how when your money is strange on your EBT or got cut off, where are the spots for you to go to eat until you got to go back to your caseworker, or you're able to wait till the period where your GR is cut off and can be reapplied.
All right, we're going to take a moment here to talk about some of these acronyms. So GR, that is a County of Los Angeles relief program for adults. If your income is low, you can apply, and those benefits are usually around $221 a month. SNAP is Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. That's the federal version of food stamps. California's state version is called CalFresh. Those are accessed via EBT, Electronic Benefits Transfer. That's essentially a debit card that swipes like a Visa, but pulls from your food stamps or nutrition assistance account. And so now that we've got these acronyms out of the way, back to our conversation with Theo Henderson.
I created the first Unhoused News, and it's designed for unhoused people to navigate or protect themselves from housed people. Like, be aware that there's housed people that are setting fire to unhoused people, or hobo hunting. Be aware that there's people on vigilante sites are saying violent things, or other kind of ordinance or law that's going to prevail for them, I was responsible for trying to keep them apprised of that. So those are the things that when I do with the Unhoused, which I'm partnering with iHeartRadio now, is to really set the beacon or the clarion call for more unhoused people to get their stories. They're the experts, to have their stories uplifted without the meritocracy narrative. I don't do that. I believe that everyone needs services, and I believe everyone needs to be treated with dignity and respect. I may not understand what it's like to be an unhoused person with 2 kids, but I believe you should have your story told with the dignity and respect that is accorded. I may not understand that there's an unhoused person that's at stage 4 brain cancer, but I believe you need to have your story told to let people know that it's not that easy to be dealing with brain cancer, chemotherapy, or going to appointments and then starting to keep your stuff together, or having to try to navigate housing and then they don't have housing yet. Like the gentleman that I hosted when it was a heat wave, he had skin cancer. Now, how do you navigate dealing with skin cancer and you're out here on the street in a heat wave and you can't have your tent up to have a shade because police will take your tent or ticket you?
Right.
So these are the realities that house people don't contemplate because it doesn't include in their reality. But these are real life issues that people have to navigate. I am diabetic. It was very hard to be diabetic, to be out in the street because my blood sugar ballooned, my weight ballooned. I was unhealthy weight. I was eating the food I wasn't supposed to eat because I could not do a balanced meal setting because I don't have refrigeration. I don't have a place where I can store the food, where I don't have to gorge the whole food before it spoils. Mm-hmm. Your medication is taken because they swept your stuff and thrown it away. If you have health issues and heart issues or stress, like these are the things that are not understood and not told. These things are a valid issue.
Right. We'll be right back with more from podcast host and housing advocate Theo Henderson. Everyone Eats is inspired by Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, engaged in intense struggle to advance freedom for Black people since 2013. The struggle continues, and when we fight, we win. We encourage all who are committed to Black freedom to become involved in Black Lives Matter Los Angeles. Find out more at blmla.org. Now more with housing advocate and podcast host Theo Henderson. So in LA County, they do a homeless count every year, and their 2023 homeless count for LA County recorded 75,518 people unhoused. And then LA County released a study in 2021 disclosing that in the year 2021, 2,201 people died. That means 6 people every day, unhoused people in Los Angeles County, are dying as a result of all the various stressors and ills that being unhoused brings.
Let me interject right quickly to say in Los Angeles as well, we have enough housing for the unhoused community here. I want to also say that we also need to introduce the idea of social housing, but I also want to point out that basically due to the capitalism and the greed of our society here in Los Angeles, in certain parts of Los Angeles, there are unoccupied houses that became dilapidated due to Caltrans resisting to repair the housing or to work with the city to create housing for people that were being ejected because of the exploding rents and the stagnant wages. You cannot explain away increasing unhoused elderly population. You cannot explain away and say that they don't want to work. You cannot explain it away that they're all substance users. You cannot say they're all mentally ill because these are people that have lived their entire lives listening to the detritus of society saying, if you do this and this and this, then you are a valued member of society.
The social contract.
Exactly.
Yes, and the American dream, if you will.
Yes, exactly. And so it doesn't work now because you can't use what they have been using constantly. For example, recently, Metro in downtown Los Angeles had a nauseating social event where Kevin De Leon blamed the activists who were demanding for dignified housing as the reason why unhoused people are not being housed. And also, most importantly, in most of the polite society, we are governed by respectability politics. We are even told how to protest. People were becoming to the vapors or they clutched their pearls because the idea that people are becoming loud and speaking out against the injustice. We have to do things in such a polite way to show that we're suffering. We have to suffer silently. So people not really paying attention, they can go away unscathed unaffected by the injustice that people that are dying. And what it struck me is that when we are trying to get the attention or get people out of the doldrums or the humdrum of their lives, they don't understand. Protest is what made this country what it is, because no one is going to give you anything that you deserve in this country because of the fact that it was stolen and taken. They'll drain the resources from you and then blame you for your own extinction.
Right. When you say that no one's going to give you what you ask for, no one's going to give you what you need. Recently, we've had some kind of, some would say radical, disruptive protest movements. Others would say humane responses to 6 people dying every day because they are not housed.
Absolutely.
But you're saying the respectability politics and the kind of status quo,
yes,
right?
Or meritocracy narrative that we love to point out, like you have to deserve housing. And these people that are on the street should be swept or engage in the violence because they are not necessarily on the streets. And they don't understand how we are inextricably locked. All it takes is a medical emergency. All it takes is that someone says, Jeremy, thank you for your services, but we don't need them any longer. And basically on the rent here, if you don't find enough employment in time or you don't find financial stability in time, you may be out here doing a couch commitment. And then if you get into an argument or spat with a person that you're with, you may be on the street. And something that I've noticed recently, we have had business improvement district community organizations who go around targeting unhoused people. And this one really has stayed with me all weekend. It has been hot, and many unhoused people are moving and migrating to stay shaded and trying to get cool. And it was so with this unhoused gentleman. He wasn't bothering anyone. He wasn't communicating with them. But 2 security officers came upon this person. One of the women pulled out a taser to intimidate the guy. The guy became so flustered and he just picked up his stuff and left. And these systems that we already have in place or we're creating to judge or make it more difficult is the reason why when we say everyone eats in a utopian society, we must understand that housing is a human right and dignified housing is also imperative as well.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about what you were talking about, these forces arrayed against the unhoused and this crisis we're facing in Los Angeles and really all over the country. Is it NIMBYs? Of course, that stands for Not in My Backyard. These are people who would love for assistance to reach those who need it as long as they don't have to see it or it's in their district. Maybe it's racist zoning. What, in your view, is arrayed against progress?
The homeless industrial complex requires long-term functioning as well as short-term. Short-term, you have to have an education or a disinformation campaign to get everyone on board in demonizing. If you can demonize a group of people, then you can criminalize them. So the misinformation campaign begins with utilizing LAPD or police officers as if they're the paragon of excellence, of right and wrong, and safety, and things of that nature. So if you have come from that base, then when police officers say that unhoused people are a problem or they are causing safety concerns or they are causing quality of life concerns, then the NIMBYs drink into it and they communicate with each other. And then they create groups called neighborhood council. Neighborhood councils are very powerful in respect because they connect with the police, then they connect with the city officials. Now, the city officials understand the thorny issue of houselessness, but they also understand that there is a strong anti-unhoused sentiment. Instead of pushing against this, they will ride the wave of anti-unhoused sentiment and use the idea that we all can come together and come up with a solution with the stick and carrot approach. And most often not this stick approach because that gets everybody on board with demonizing unhoused people. Like 4118 is the ordinance here that is the new Jim Crow. And for those that don't know what 4118 is, 4118 started out in the 60s against protesting. And it took several transformations, but the long and short of it is against the law here in Los Angeles to sit, sleep, or lie if you're unhoused. And the conversational point, like you're a safety against schools or children or seniors. And they use that conversation, which harkens back into the Jim Crow era. Or actually, I take it back, take it all the way from the after.
Slave patrols.
Yeah, slave patrols. Even after when the Civil War ended, people don't know no trespassing signs literally came from the slavery era. That's from the legacy of them removing Black community members that had been freed from slavery and use it to justify them to get back in chain gangs or back in prison.
Just to provide some background here, I believe what you're talking about is after Civil War ends, Reconstruction happens, you've got federal troops essentially at gunpoint forcing these former slave masters to let these Black people live, at which point there are more Black people in Congress and in public life in America than any time ever. About 10 years of that, these white people in the South said, enough. KKK gets formed, the federal troops pull out, and they decide, okay, we can't just go around killing people. Well, we're going to do that, but we can't kill them all. What are we going to do? You're talking about passing laws, they call them Black codes, to make being Black and being outside a crime.
Right.
That's when no trespassing happens. That's when vagrancy happens. That's when if you are standing outside and a police officer walks up to you and says, what are you doing here? Why aren't you in your home? And you say, oh, sir, I was enslaved until 18 months ago. I have no income. I have no home. You're going to get locked up. And you're saying those laws were enacted expressly for the purpose of rounding up large groups of Black people legally through the 13th Amendment, which allows slavery. Still, if a crime has been committed as a punishment, to put people back where they feel they belonged. And you're saying that 4118, the Los Angeles Municipal Code, currently being used to sweep encampments, you're saying they're drawing a direct line between that moment and now we're still there.
Absolutely.
And the hammer is the law enforcement. But the thing that swings the hammer, the little activating switch, that kind of little burr that keeps us in Los Angeles from having a more compassionate approach to housing, you're saying it's where white supremacy meets capitalism.
Right. Our society was brought about by stealing and siphoning the resources of people, forcing enslaved Africans to come here, bringing their knowledge and technical skills in order to carve out a frontier. And we worked them for free in many respects and then called them lazy when we tried to stay in greed and stay in our wealth. Secondly, where people are coping with mental health issues or coping with dealing with what is capitalism by using substances to cope with the harsh realities of life, we will focus on asking cops to take them away instead of creating harm reduction sites.
We'll be right back with more of my interview with Theo Henderson. Everyone Eats is inspired by Palms Unhoused Mutual Aid, an abolitionist network of care supporting unhoused people in the Palms neighborhood of Los Angeles. Find out more on their Instagram at Palms Unhoused Mutual Aid. We're back. Now more with housing advocate and podcast host Theo Henderson. The last time the Los Angeles Housing Authority built public housing was in 1955. 1955. 1% of every American lives in public housing. Vienna, 6 in 10. 60% of the people who live in that city live in public housing and love it. Here, 1%. So I suggest one way to do it would be create some spaces to live, which do not require generating a profit. You build a place for people to live because people need to live, and that's it. What for you is like immediately low-hanging fruit that right now in Los Angeles you feel like is having a little bit of momentum that we could jump into? And then going from there, where would you like to see it go?
This is going to be unpopular for people that are police officer bootlickers.
None here, Theo. You are among friends here.
The lion's share of any monies that has been given to police comes from houselessness services. Right now, as it stands, the LAPD gets over $3 billion. $3 billion. And they're always complaining. But you have to understand, anytime that there's any type of funding done about houseless services, the LAPD takes a lion's share of it. When it was the pandemic, they took the lion's share of it. When there is a budget, they take the lion's share of it. At every turn, because of the conversation, and because everyone believes that the police officers are going to stop and solve houselessness by arresting people, and it just doesn't work. It hasn't worked over 20 years. No matter how you face it, here comes someone always trying to increase the police officer's budget to do absolutely nothing but demonize and target people of color and victimize it. So that's the first thing. We have to basically get the LAPD and law enforcement out of the conversation, cut their purse strings, and because they're not solving it, they're actually exacerbating it. Make it so that they see one unhoused person that acts out of character or breaks the law, and they'll make it sound like that over 75,000 unhoused people are about to kick in their door
Right.
and do harm to them. And in order for it to be effective, they have to blame the people that are speaking out. We are not supposed to have any autonomy. If I was to come and say, I'm going to have to amputate your foot, then yes, your foot's not the problem. And you saying, hey, this is not the issue. The issue is my tooth. I need this tooth removed. And you turned it down, then now you're the problem. And you're the one that's at fault.
Right, of course. Yeah, because, why wouldn't it be? But we're going to switch gears now. That's what is, right? We're going to talk about what's possible if we fight together. You can remake Los Angeles. You, Theo, you're in charge in any way that you want. You can house everyone. No one lives outside. Talk to me about what that would be like. What would that look like? A Los Angeles where everyone lives inside.
Well, first, I would be removing the police because they're absolutely useless in this because they are part of the problem of causing houselessness. They are arresting or giving tickets where unhoused people can't pay, and then they're putting them in jail. Then it creates a different downward cycle. The second thing I would do is take the monies that we keep pumping into unhoused people and create dignified housing and supportive services. We need a campaign where everyone housed and unhoused needs to be trained into Narcan training. We need to understand what overdoses is. We need to understand the symptom of why people are on substances. And that's the issue, that because we have so much of a puritanical and I have to say a religiosity, if there is such a word, narrative against substances and not understanding people are self-medicating because the system is broken and there's no help to be had unless you're being judged or condemned. The third thing is I would basically, again, create dignified housing, but also a way...
What do you mean by dignified housing? How does dignified housing different than just housing?
I point that out because for people... like when I am placed in like an SRO. And
SRO is a single resident occupancy.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a room, just to be clear for the listeners, it's essentially a room that you have access to. You may have a hot plate, you have a bed, and there is a bathroom, but not in the room.
Community
so
and
every
shower.
floor has bathroom, shower facilities, and shared per floor, kind of like a college dorm room, if you will. These are a lot of hotels in downtown have been converted to SROs. And they offer cheaper rents and are sometimes subsidized by the city, by other
agencies as well.
Agencies and service providers to get people quickly off the streets and into these occupancies.
See, the difficulty with these places as well, these buildings were old and decaying anyway. And because we use so much money for cops, we don't have upkeep funding in order to keep the buildings up to code or up to where it's dignified.
Right.
So a lot of times we're in dilapidated environs that we really are not getting the dignified housing. And
so this is what's being offered. When you say that someone is on the street and they've been, quote, offered housing, you're saying that sometimes it's not dignified, sometimes it's dilapidated shacks. These are places that renters wouldn't live and aren't living. And maybe even, tell me if I'm on something here, maybe even that's why they're being offered to the unhoused.
Exactly.
Because it's fallen to such a state of disrepair that you couldn't possibly rent this out to a paying public. So you'll actually take taxpayer money and put the unhoused in there?
And take an exorbitant amount of taxpayers' money. They'll use these dilapidated housing for people that people don't want to see in their neighborhoods. The second thing is the carceral rules. I don't go to your house. I don't tell you when you can go to bed. I don't tell you who you can't have a visit because it's none of my business. You're a grown man. And whoever it is, as long as it's above board and legal, that's where the end is. But that's not SROs. They have places where it's very antagonistic. People...
What are some of the rules, if you don't mind?
Curfew. For example, where I at, you can't use the rooftop to be able to go and get some air.
And where are you at?
I'm downtown in the areas where most of the SROs are, where you can't be able to have the autonomy. And the place is so narrow that most people, if you're living in you live in an apartment, you'll go out to get a breath of fresh air. You go out to hang out with your community members. It lends itself to not really communicating with people that live in the place. Also, to point out, too, is that many people are broken and just off the streets, and they don't have the supportive services. And sometimes they fall sway into loneliness or fall sway into problem-seeking behaviors. And it becomes very difficult to navigate that because some people are at different places in their lives and they don't need to be tempted or they are afraid because people are acting not rationally. So it's like when you hear that people are unhoused, people think everyone has the same problem. Everyone lives in the same place, and that is not true. When you go to the hospital, there are different wards, right? Everyone's sick, but everyone has a specialized challenge that requires a certain expertise, a certain treatment in order for you to get the help that you need. And that is the same with houselessness. There's an elderly population. You can't go and start do a job training program for 80 and 90-year-old people and tell them they're going to, it makes no sense. Or, for example, there are over 60,000 unhoused children. And not all of them are on substances. Not all of them are mentally ill. They're children. You can't start a job training program for elementary school kids that they're on the street. You have to tailor the program in order to meet the needs.
Who in Los Angeles is doing house keys instead of handcuffs? Who is doing care, not cops? Who, in your opinion, could people who are interested in leaning into this kind of work, building a world in which people in Los Angeles, no matter their income, can live inside? Are there any organizations, candidates, politicians, groups, movements that they should be aware of where they could lean in that you could recommend?
Right now, we have mutual aid programs. I don't know if you remember, there was a few weeks ago, we had like the hurricane.
Yeah,
and
the hurricane.
Yeah, and the thing with it is that many unhoused people had no earthly idea this was going on.
We had a hurricane and an earthquake on the same day in Southern California. Both are rare, but together was just madness, and even worse for those who are unhoused.
And because of the city did not have adequate kind of conversation or points where we could reach out to them to be able to get them a way for safety. Mutual aid groups, people that are concerned about unhoused people, got together, fundraised for tarps and things like that to help unhoused people in order for them to survive. Because of the system as it is right now, we don't have any place that I can say with a certain amount of confidence that are helping unhoused people get into dignified housing. But I dare say that with a stronger education campaign to counteract the disinformation campaign, we can push back. And that is my hope. That's why I continue to do the podcast. I'm glad you have opened this conversation for people to really dial in and to really get an untrammeled conversational and actually an understanding on what the issues are. How does houselessness play a part in today? Because people always complain about houselessness, but how can you expect in the next 5 years that when you see over 75,000, which will grow maybe to 80,000 unhoused people, how this is going to impact our society from the environmental, from health-wise, as well as from the situation where people can't afford the rent. So these kind of conversation points must be had. I speak, which I'm going to speak soon at UCLA, I speak regularly there, and people are shocked that there are unhoused people in UCLA. And one of the unhoused persons jumped up when he says, "Thank you for saying this because I'm unhoused." And it like his classmates were like shocked.
They couldn't believe it.
Yeah. And it's like, but more of them are starting to say, it's more than just the tents you see. It's people are trying to hide and enfold themselves in society from not being ostracized. But they are going to college trying to make themselves a better life, but they can't afford the surrounding rents out there. So they have to live on the streets. Conversely, we've had an excellent lunch today, but the produce that was produced, it's produced by people that are literally, after they pick off produce from the field, are living out in open areas because they cannot afford the housing. So when you go to Ralph's and those places, they'll get your fruits and things like that. Those usually are picked by unhoused produce workers because they can't afford the housing. You are calling the police on them, but this is the reality. Right. That you are getting the food and getting all of the spoils, if you will, but you are contributing to the harm, whether you know it or not.
Like you said, there is the mental image of the unhoused. It's like, oh, this is a Black person. They are mumbling to themselves, and they're probably harassing some, nice young blonde woman. And we really got to do something about this guy. We got to arrest him. That's our image, right, of a quote unquote unhoused person. Right. But you're saying that no, anyone who can't afford rent in Los Angeles is either A, unhoused, or B, about to be unhoused when their friend says you can't stay on my couch. Yeah. That's a sobering thought. Keep that in mind when you're thinking about do these people deserve compassion, et cetera. 1 in 2 renters in Los Angeles are severely burdened, which means they're spending 50% of their income on rent and utilities, which, like you said, a medical emergency, you lose your job, et cetera. You mentioned earlier some of your caseworkers were one banana peel away from being unhoused themselves.
Exactly. For the most part, we need to look at some of the people of color mutual aids like J-Town Action and Solidarity.
K-Town for All?
K-Town for All. But these are people of color groups that have an understanding, and these are not nonprofits. They don't get any big money. They rely on donations. Every weekend, they're going out helping basically put a Band-Aid on a broken leg.
These are mutual aid groups.
Mutual aid groups, which is very different than charities and nonprofits. For example, this month, September, is Hunger Action Month, and people are still going into this antiquated idea of just sending canned goods to places like food banks. The issue is that unhoused people are not using these canned goods. Unhoused people are using foods that needs to be quickly used and be able to prepare or to eat on the run. So we have to expand from the idea, because I grew up, and I'm dating how old I am, back in the high schools and elementary schools, we used to have a food bank day.
Canned food drive.
Everyone's got to bring
it. Yeah, of course.
But that...
We're having a carnival down at the church. Admission is 2 cans.
Exactly. And now it's like I realize that is not really... that's not hitting anything. Most often than not, let's be real, a lot of times people will give canned goods of food that they don't eat in their house, or the government green beans or things like that. And the idea is the unhoused people should be grateful for what they got. And that ideology or that philosophy needs to change too. People are grateful for food, but we all as human beings, we have taste, and some of the food, let's be honest, I can't eat because it will blow up my sugar or I will be jacked up for a while. And that is another conversational point that is really difficult for people that are so trained, and like you have to be grateful for what God gives you or whatever someone
Bakers
gives.
can't be choosers.
Exactly.
Right. Personal responsibility. You deserve this.
Yes. And that's really hard for them to understand. Human beings are not automatons. We are different. We're varied. We have taste. I'm allergic to eggs, so I can't eat some scrambled eggs. I have to really watch what I eat if they have it included in it, because I'll break out and have an episode. So, I mean, so these conversations goes over the heads of many people. But I hope now times it's going to get to a point where people are like, okay, these are human beings. Let's start to give this type of food. Let's do this. Let's devote our time to mutual aid. Let's show up to mutual aids. Let's create food for unhoused people that maybe are dietary restricted. We got elderly people. They can't eat spicy tacos, or they can't eat it due to dietary restrictions, or they're vegetarians. So just because you're unhoused, you don't stop being a human being.
Right. Yeah. I mean, exactly. Right. Yeah. Like here in LA, it didn't start here, but it's catching on, which is the idea of the community fridge. And this is a movement. This is an idea where you get an appliance, a refrigerator, you plug it in an accessible location, and then members of the community donate produce, food, maybe personal items, toiletries, and members of the community, no questions asked, can access that. I was actually part of that group and helped get a community fridge together in Echo Park at the Aroma Laundry before ownership changed. And it used to blow my mind. It still does. But like we would have to, it's in the rules, right? Which is, remember, we are not policing these resources. You might see someone who isn't limping. Mm-hmm. You might see someone who looks like they have a strong back.
Right.
You might see someone who looks like they could work an honest job. Mm-hmm. And they might walk up to that fridge with a shopping cart, open it up, and put 6 days worth of groceries piled high in that shopping cart and walk away into the sunset. And what we're not going to do is say, hey, say something for someone else. What we're not going to do is quiz them about their needs. That's not what this is about. This is about fulfilling needs in the community. If that person needs that, they're welcome to it. So I kind of want to ask you about that program that's happening in Los Angeles. Do you find as an activist and advocate for the unhoused community that is a community benefit? How do you feel about its impact? And where would you like to see it go?
I would like to see it go much more accessible, because September is Hunger Action Month. September is also where for many people housed and unhoused, their GREBT pandemic benefits have been cut off. And so people are really hungry and people are really suffering. So the community fridges, and which we've been seeing in a lot of the mutual aid groups that I have, is that unhoused people, we've been tightening our belt. Our portions have been smaller. Conversations I had that I really don't like is like saving some for someone else, because you're really not giving enough food for people anyway. You're just giving only, a small amount. So the thing with it is that I would like to see greater movement in our mutual aid group a more deeper, compassionate understanding that we need to up our game a little bit, but also instead of trying to parcel out the food, because sometimes people are not eating right then, they're eating later on, or they're feeding their families. So when you see them wanting more, we don't know the story. So I think that's one of the directions I would like to see, was taking some of that police officer funding and utilize and start giving it to the mutual aids to start help feeding unhoused people. The next thing I would like to see as another mutual aid is our education campaign, dealing with teaching unhoused people about doing harm reduction. The idea we keep criminalizing people that are in vulnerable states is not helping the solution. And it's only being done because NIMBYs don't want to see the problems. They don't care about the problems. They don't have the empathy to get people to understand the symptoms of poverty and things like that. Instead of saying, well, we need to be compassionate and find solutions so they don't have to go to jail, or we can find solutions where they can be weaned off of substances. And the long and short of it is, let's alleviate poverty. Let's create subsidies for these places where the rent's not so high. Let's create subsidies for people to be able to afford food that is not so explosively expensive. It's not being really advocated or pushed because we have a strong, stubborn nugget of people that have this meritocracy and this respectability politics that's killing everybody. People magically are not going to just start to work when they're starving. People magically are not going to just become unill because you don't want them to have steak and lobster or some other ridiculous nonsense that people are clinging to. So that's what I would do.
Right. You're pushing back against the bootstraps
yes.
narrative. I want to ask you about something that I noticed you mentioned a few times, which was this idea of like a meritocracy. Mm-hmm. Merit being like you deserve what the results are because whether by your action, will, luck, whatever, you, through your own endeavors, through your own will, you've brought about these results. And so everything that happens is a result of your effort directly, and nothing else is going on. And so because we believe in a meritocracy, everyone has what they deserve. Expand on that a little bit. When you say the problem of meritocracy in our society, what is it that you mean?
Usually meritocracy is used to delineate from the deserving, undeserving poor. And most often than not, the most deleterious actions are done by poor people against poorer people. For example, there's been, and I know you've seen this one during the Trump, when he's running for office, there was a Latino woman demonizing other Latino people for coming to the country illegally. And she was applauded by the most hateful and people that despises her people. And the irony is that she ended up getting deported by espousing those same things. And that is what has been going on in our communities. And it got to such a point where I was on a talk show and they literally played me the NIMBYist unhoused person's comments. And I had to sit there and defend and explain why that was problematic. If you have to harm someone in order to elevate your conversation, that's not helping anybody. I'm not going to platform that. And I love this saying, if you can't help anybody, don't harm them. You can't understand their situation, don't speak on it because you're not the expert on it. I don't speak negatively about people that are dealing with substances. I don't do substances, but I understand that there is a level of strain, of stress, and pain that they are dealing with that I can't fathom, but I have the compassion to know that they need help too. They don't need to be criminalized because that's not going to do anything. And that is the kind of battles that we have to face among ourselves as well as a larger context. There's no such thing as an undeserving unhoused person that doesn't need services. Everyone needs help somewhere. We all need help, housed and unhoused. And if we can't see or have the compassion to understand that, then, we need to really examine our role in the human existence.
Yeah, thank you for that. Because fuck that, right? The idea that you have to be the monopoly man, right? Uncle Pennybags or whatever, to have anything nice in this world. It's like, oh, yes, they need to sleep inside, but they can't have a locking door and a dry bed. Oh, no. How about leaky pipes, black mold, and no access to keys. Oh, and a curfew too, so they have to be in by 7. We should give people food benefits, but hold on a minute. Ground meat only. No hot food.
No visitors.
Right,
I mean, it's every kind of way to make sure you remind you that you are the detritus of society.
Right.
Or you can't be respected as a human being.
Right. But we're pushing back against that. Fuck that. Everyone eats. It's possible. We have enough to go around. We can make this world more fair. We can change how we live, how we work, how we vote here in Los Angeles and other places. And so, yeah, I just want to, again, raise a glass. Cheers. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Dignified housing, access to services, our basic needs. It's all available if we fight for it together. Thanks so much to Theo Henderson for coming on the show. You can listen to his podcast, We the Unhoused, on iHeart and everywhere else podcasts are found. Check out the show's Patreon at patreon.com/WeTheUnhoused. Make sure to follow on Instagram at We the Unhoused and the man himself at Theo Henderson. Not spelled like you think. That's THHHEO Henderson. Thanks for listening to Everyone Eats. The show is hosted by me, Jeremy Bowditch. I'm also a producer on the show. So is Joy Sanford and Dan Gallucci. The show is recorded at Boyle Heights Beat in Boyle Heights, Los Angeles, California. Follow the show on social media at Everyone Eats LA and our website, everyoneeats.la.